On August 28, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood in front of an audience of 250,000 people and stated that he was happy to join here with you today in what will surely go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Now, I am clearly not Dr. King. And what's said here today will unfortunately likely not go down throughout future generations as anything remarkably profound, unbelievably unique, or powerfully impactful. Instead, the handful of us here gathered today might carry with us in our minds the contents of today's speeches for a week, maybe two, before it all becomes buried under the detritus of everyday living. Therefore, in these brief moments of clarity and remembrance, we must truly strive to understand the drive, the ambition behind Dr. King's dream of equality, that despite race, origin, economic standing, or literally any other factor, every American has the right to stand on their own 2 feet as a citizen of their nation, with the same basic human rights which anyone else may receive. This ambition may have been originally sparked by, and certainly persisted through, the stories which some of us may have heard in our history classes, and through which many of us have even lived. The fire hoses in parks dispersing protesters, the segregated buses, schools, and drinking fountains, the often violent racial hatred groups, and even getting caught with your pants down going out to an outhouse. But the dream was so much bigger than that. Equality not just in the right to protest and attend the same schools and attend safe bathrooms, not just between black and white, but in every aspect of life for every individual regardless of race. Despite its complexity and power, this drive can be sorted into 2 causes: inequality between men and just what that can actually mean, and the rights received by men, partnered with the transgressions against them. First, in order to understand why Dr. King strove so hard to garner equality for all races, we have to understand just what he was fighting: inequality. According to dictionary.com, inequality can be defined as a lack of equality or a state of being unequal. Because this tells us literally nothing, however, we need to revise our definition a little bit, move away from the dictionary and into real life. Don't worry, I'll start off small. If you asked a child what they thought inequality meant, they might say it's when someone gets more cookies than them. Now, we'll take one step and get just a little bit bigger. What if you asked an adult? They might suggest, like the members of the Occupy Wall Street movement, that inequality is when someone makes more money than them and that this is unfair. Now we'll take one huge step, which will allow us to understand the motivations and definitions of an entire ethnic group. During apartheid in South Africa, just like any other racial group, blacks, Indians, mixed race groups, and especially Chinese South Africans were heavily discriminated against. They were not permitted to travel without special permits. There were certain places that they could not go, and they could not even vote. Once apartheid was overturned, however, affirmative action programs were initiated in order to help previously discriminated against and impoverished groups. The definition of non-white, however, was changed according to the prominent UK newspaper The Telegraph to any member of a black, Indian, or mixed race group. Unfortunately, this left an estimated 20,000 ethnic Chinese out of programs which may have helped them after their long struggle. This discrimination against them continued until 2008 when, due to the dedicated efforts of a very small group of Chinese South Africans, according to Danwai.org, Chinese South Africans were reclassified as black. This group had the same dream and the same drive behind that dream as Dr. King, and I'd be willing to bet the same definition of what they were fighting. When we examine the plight of the Chinese South Africans, it becomes clear that inequality can be most definitively defined as an unfairness, something which makes life difficult, unpleasant, or even impossible to leave, something which places one ideal person or group above another, and something which, above all else, at its very core, crosses the boundaries of traditionally held human rights. So, now that we understand what inequality means and what Dr. King felt a drive to fight, we need to sort out what, when we look at American citizens, needs to be equal. We need to examine our rights as human beings. Of course, we've all heard the traditional American anthem of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but what does this statement really mean? According to the Encyclopedia of Philosophy, these 3 tenets of the so-called American way of life are actually indicative of a philosophical doctrine that dates back to the 17th century. Natural law. According to natural law, every human being born is born with certain rights which are decided not by man, but instead are decided by a higher natural mandate. This is an ideal we hold so close to our hearts that we put it in one of our most sacred and beloved documents, the Declaration of Independence. However, until the success of the American Civil Rights Movement rid the government of most laws enforcing inequality, we were essentially hypocritical in the way we operated our nation. The right to life was often supported, but with unfortunate strings attached. Liberty and freedom were restricted for many races, and for especially blacks, when they were barred from voting, barred from visiting many public areas, barred from making a living. The pursuit of happiness was reduced to a joke. When your life is guided by an unfair government and when the majority of your countrymen hold personal vendettas against you, happiness becomes the last thing on your mind. It's easy to understand what drove Dr. King to push his dreams so far and with such force when we actually examine the rights he and his compatriots were due and how they were denied them time and time again. Now, I am not a doctor, I am not a preacher, and my name does not contain the words Martin, Luther, or King. I've certainly not been hailed as one of the greatest speakers and civil rights leaders of my generation. I've not quite lived long enough for that. However, in my brief 17 years, I have learned about Dr. King's dream. I've learned about inequality and what it means to be discriminated against, and I have learned what rights I have as a human being. Similarly, in the coming week, while you can still remember what I've said here today, you will live, you will learn, and you will exist within the world that Dr. King's dream created. Winning here today is not the point. It'd be nice, yes, of course, but not only because it would pay for a part of my college education. Instead, if I can beat any of the entries in this competition, any of these contestants here today, which clearly I must have in order to end up on stage in front of you all now, it means I came here, I reached out, and I touched someone, connected with them, because I came here to follow my dreams for my future, and because I hope to emulate in speech one of the greatest, most influential, and most courageous men our nation has ever seen. After all, Walt Disney once said, "All of our dreams can come true if we just have the courage to pursue them." And Dr. King's dreams had, if anything, courage. Thank you.